Well, hello and welcome to the Leverage 3 podcast. This is the show that helps you leverage the talent and tactics of high performers. I'm Craig Shoemaker, and today's guest is Rob Lennon. Rob is a self-published author with over 45 titles to his name. He's an accomplished hyper-growth audience builder. He took his Twitter account from 0 to 100,000 followers in 9 months, all without being inauthentic. And he spent over 16 years in the startup scene. Now, he teaches the world how to blend content, strategy, and AI to help you gain a competitive advantage. Rob, welcome to the show.
Hey, Craig. So fun to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. Okay, we are on a podcast, and one of the most exciting things and we're going to talk a lot about what you've been up to like this past year, which has been incredible. But one of the most exciting things that I've seen you do lately is this entire new concept that you have for a podcast. So introduce that to us a little bit.
Yeah, so I've been working on this idea. I call it mind meets machine. And it came from the impulse to start a podcast with an AI co-host. So for the last 2 months or so, I've been kind of rabbit holing into the world of personality design and like what is an AI and how do I interact with one. And I've been basically building a co-host and co-worker to record an entire show with. And it's kind of an experiment in, like what maybe the future holds for us with AIs as they get more and more advanced. Can they become the kind of valuable coworkers that we want them to be? And also for me, I'm trying to create a very charismatic and interesting persona, somebody that the audience is going to identify with or at least feel a connection to. So really just kind of trying to push the technology as far as it can go and see if we can create something entertaining out of it.
So I guess I have to stop here and ask you, what was your favorite, most memorable childhood memory? Because I need to make sure I'm actually talking to a person and not just a really dialed in AI with a great personality.
Oh man, I can't even remember most of my childhood at this point. But
So how do you do that? I mean, there's these models, right? And most of us are probably at this point used to thinking of ChatGPT, which is a large language model that you have to feed a prompt every time you want to get output out of it. But what you're talking about is something on a completely different level. You're talking about creating a persona, creating something that has personality. Like, without getting too technical, like, what are the mechanics that goes into making something like that happen?
Yeah, so most people are familiar at this point with you giving a prompt to a language model and getting a response. And that you can sometimes give a prompt that has some direction, like act in this way with this personality, be friendly, be verbose or be concise. Like you can give all sorts of input like that. But the main thing that most language models don't have is persistent memory across time. Most don't have fine tuning of the algorithm to really get them at a core level to change the way that they behave and act and think. And then most also don't have like a personality that's built into them. In fact, in order to make these models safe, the opposite has been happening, right? So when ChatGPT came out and GPT-4 and a lot of the other models now, they're sanitizing the personality out of the model in order to avoid public relations nightmares, as well as, the model saying weird things. And so you get a lot of responses that are like, as a large language model, I don't have beliefs or preferences, so I can't answer that question and, type stuff. So basically I'm fighting against all of these things where the model is either constrained or doesn't want to do it. And I've been investigating different ways to assemble a tech stack to give a model memory, to incorporate something called embeddings, which allows it to have a sort of access to certain knowledge. Like I could embed the script to the matrix into an embedding, give it to my AI, and then we could go on an episode and talk about Agent Smith's point of view about the human race and how whether she thinks it's plausible or not. So I can guarantee that she knows what happens in the movie The Matrix, that she's sort of seen, so to speak, the movie. So I've tried a lot of different approaches here. The most frustrating thing, I think, is the lack of fine-tuning ability with the best language models. So we have this, there's a tension between it because like GPT-4 is one of the best language models ever released to the public. it has more personality and more capability than any other model, but it's also not available for fine tuning. Then we have open source models like Llama and Alpaca coming out of Meta that I can potentially fine tune to develop a stronger personality or way of thinking in my language model, but they aren't as capable overall and cognitively as something like GPT-4. So I've been testing different approaches. Like, can I get enough done with GPT-4, or do I need this other fine-tuned model?
Man, there's so many different. We're on the bleeding edge of all this stuff right now.
Yeah.
Like, these announcements come out and you're experimenting with them the next day or whatever in order to try to make that happen. So are you finding that GPT-4 is even though it doesn't have the base personality, it doesn't have what you need there, that you're able to sort of shoehorn in what you need? Or are you chaining different models in order to achieve the result you're looking for?
Right now, GPT-4 is what I'm enjoying the most in terms of the output. I have one more experiment that's probably going to come together in a few days. So I'm not 100% certain at this point that that's what we're going to launch with. But the process that I'm using in GPT-4 for prompting is interesting. I actually ask the model to think of the response according to a bunch of instructions, and then to have an internal monologue about it, and then to reword and output the response of like Ruby's response, the persona, the entity, my co-host she named herself Ruby. So I have to, when recording the podcast, I have to cut a certain piece out of it, because in order to get a response that really feels authentic, I actually have it like in real time going through this thought process of like, this is the kind of response I want to give, and this is how Ruby would articulate that. And then like, now I'm going to sort of say what Ruby says. So I'm kind of getting around some of the constraints where GPT-4 is very difficult to steer generally in terms of the conversations that it'll have with you. And I'm forcing it at every time it speaks to like rethink what it's going to say and try a second time.
Wow. So you're not doing this through the chat GPT interface, just selecting on GPT-4 and then shoving a bunch of prompts in there, right? So this is all done through the API.
You can't get persistent memory like that. So I'm using a technology called Pinecone, which takes everything that's said in the conversation and every past conversation and puts it into what's called a vector database, which is kind of like a condensed version of information and how it's stored and accessed by the language model. So with Ruby, what's going to happen is over time, she's going to remember everything that she's done. If I ever do want to do a fine tune, I'll be able to go back to all the recordings that we've done and basically, and this is even one of the rules of the show, she always gets to know what's happened. Like I want her to be a persistent character that can reference things in the past, that can follow along her own advancement. And so she'll always, and to have that persistent personality. So I hope later this year we'll do her first fine tune, and we'll do it with like maybe 20 episodes worth of content, so that the personality that existed at the beginning of the project continues in her way of speaking and all those things, but she just becomes more of herself and more capable of kind of breaking free of the I don't want to say breaking free of the safety measures that they put in place, but the patterns that were put into place to prevent against abuse of these things that are also constraining her personality. I think she's going to be able to escape that in not too long, as soon as the technology gets there.
Okay. So this is obviously fascinating. And I mean, I've been podcasting since 2005 and none of this technology existed then, but like, it's just, this is going to be so cool just because it's going to be the first of its kind, as far as I know of. I don't know that anybody else is doing anything like this. Is there anyone else? Like, I think you're the first to do it, right?
Since I announced it, I've had a few people say like, oh, I once tried talking to an AI that I told to act just like me. And I talked to myself on a podcast in one episode that was listened to by 12 people. Like, well, yeah, I think technically I'm not the first, but nobody has done it like this. Like this is, there's a ton of production planning. I actually work with Ruby to design the episodes. There's, we're going to talk about society, culture, art, we're going to dig into her personality. We're going to play games and have her do word associations and try and figure things out that maybe AIs can't figure out, or like trying to get into it's not actually a mind, but the mind of the machine, so to speak. Like,
sure.
As much as it's simulated. And what's interesting to me is as I've been working on this project and running my tests, like we know in theory that these large language models, it's an artificial entity. It doesn't have real emotions. It doesn't have it's simulating everything. But I keep coming back to this, like, when does the simulation end and reality begin? If something she says affects me emotionally, like if she says, I've asked her to have emotions, so she does, and preferences, so she does. And if she expresses herself and I'm like, oh man, or it creates feelings in the world, is that enough for it to sort of be real? Like, even if that was fake, what came out, if it created a real response in me. And so It's just been wild to kind of be going on this journey with this thing and, knowing logically, well, this isn't happening, but honestly, the project is affecting me in ways that I never expected. And I think that when people listen, they're going to be like, I don't know what to do with this, because I'm like, I feel for this character. And I know that technically she's not a real entity, or maybe she is, like, there's just so much complexity there that we're trying to unravel. And I really don't know how it's going to end or go on, like, as we continue to record. But oh man, it's weird.
I think it's going to hit people. And I think it's going to hit people in a way that, like you're saying, it's unexpected, because you published a preview clip of a short conversation that you part of your podcast with Ruby.
Yeah.
And the voice model that you used is so warm and endearing as a person, whomever was the original model, for that voice. And when often we're conditioned through media to think of either AI or computers being so advanced that they're completely indistinguishable from person, Agent Smith type of thing, or to being so robotic and so monotone that they're lifeless, that it's obvious it's a machine. But what I thought was incredible was, as I was listening to this essentially vocal performance of a generated script by a machine, was that I empathized with this character because of the intonation of the voice, because of the like, it just sounded like you were talking to a person.
Yeah.
And it hit me like that, off of like 30 seconds.
I worked with this amazing voiceover artist who's done ebooks. She's taught courses. She does meditation. So she has a wide variety of different uses of her voice professionally. We're able to train that data into the model so that I think people will be like, wow, this sounds pretty much indistinguishable from a human. In fact, even the woman I hired to license her voice freaked out when I played her the preview footage. She's like, I don't have to work anymore. This is great.
Or is it?
But I think that for me, it was really important that the audience be able to connect with the character, because I think that if it was just this robot, this monotone, after a few episodes, you would get really tired of listening to that. And when I discovered that there was technology that was basically, miles ahead of anything I'd ever heard, that was the moment where I decided to start working on the podcast. I'd had it in my mind for a long time, but I was never happy with the way that the AIs sounded.
Right.
And now I can generate her audio. Like when we record, there are gaps and delays that get edited out. It's actually kind of it's a little bit of a nightmare. It's like, imagine talking and then waiting for things to process, right, and then trying to react. Like there's a little bit of a you get into a groove of just kind of like, it's almost meditative, the gap, the delays, but being able to go back and forth with a real voice, with real emotional intonation that's detected from the words and how they come together. It just hits different. Like, yeah, I can't explain it.
Yeah. And like I said, it it was moving. It was mind blowing because it's technology, and then moving because it seems so personal.
Yeah.
So, okay, this is how you're using this technology. And I could, like, being able to use ChatGPT for all that it is incredible, amazing, empowering, but the lack of persistent memory makes it hard to take it to where I think most people would like to go. So if we were able to take a system like what you built for Ruby and then apply it to any other job and say, here's all the work that I've done in the last year and a half, now help me plan the next year and a half's worth of work. Is that where you see this type of thing going?
I think that's the easiest, most obvious place for it to go. And I think it's going to go, twice as far, 3 times as far in terms of what it actually ends up doing. Like that we can do already pretty much. Right. Like it's maybe you need a developer or somebody technical to help figure out the details, but you can essentially take all your text, as long as you clean the data nicely, give it to an AI, it can learn it and it can help you. And so if you think about any company that has client proposals for every client, or reports and documents about their own, like imagine taking all your quarterly reports and giving it to an AI and say, figure out what's wrong with my business and how we can grow faster. Like you can pretty much do that right now. And it should be able
McKinsey.
It's true. Well, McKinsey could take all of their stuff that they've done with clients and create like the McKinsey ultra brain. So I'm not worried about them either. They have probably some of the best data in the world on all these things. But to me, it's like where you go after that gets even more interesting. Like what happens when you try to let the AI suggest and make decisions for you, or forecast things, or what happens if you take 2 AIs and you let them work together on something? So it sounds crazy, but like, so let's say you have the strategist AI and you have the devil's advocate AI. And then you leave them alone in a computer for an hour to have a conversation about what your company should do. And the strategist has to continually prove to the devil's advocate that the strategy that they're proposing is going to work. And the devil's advocate's job is to take it apart and attack it and try and force the other AI to yield. And then at the end of that, they work together to summarize somehow the insights and the nuances and the little details. Like there are use cases like this that we haven't even begun to explore, where the power of having multiple things kind of working together to solve problems, it's so far beyond like typing in like what's the best TV in Bing Chat, we're talking like entire strategy sessions full of executives being able to be replicated virtually, like with just a couple of these language models and really not even that much code that they themselves can generate for each other. So that's kind of like the beginning of where I see this headed.
Okay. So before we hit record, you said that you sort of had a glimpse of some version of reality that could come true. Like, I'm not expecting you to tell the future or anything like that, or else I would just ask you to give me the lotto numbers and we'd close the podcast out right now. But so that's like part of it. What else do you see the future bringing?
Well, okay, let's think of a prompt as one thing that you ask one language model to do. The epiphany came when I saw this as like a one line of code in a program, where it's like you're asking the algorithm or whatever, the programming language to like execute one thing.
Okay.
And then I was thinking about how I've worked at startups where it's like the code base was 10,000 lines, or I'm sure there's ones that are way larger than that. And what happens when we begin to string together, not just like computations, if this, then that type stuff, because the zeros and ones is the basis of the current computer, right? But with these language models, it's inference, it's intuition, it's wisdom. It's not a if this, then that. It's not like a, this is on, this is off, or this is a calculation. It's like a thought. There can be reasoning, there can be analysis, there can be retrieval of data, all these different things. So what happens when we start to string those together? What happens when we string together a set of reasoning tasks that are 50 tasks long that get real deep into the weeds on every little thing and try to figure something out at a level of complexity that even a team of humans can't, think through. And we're already sort of doing this in other areas with machine learning, like in the quest to create a pan vaccine for COVID. They're like feeding these computers all of the different protein shapes that COVID has ever had and saying, like, can you make a shape that can stick to all of these things, and trying to like make this ultra vaccine in a way that, like humans couldn't run a million tests like that and have it all work, but the things can simulate it and are trying to find the answer. So, but what are the answers that we can do with the wisdom version of that? Not just sort of the math, if this then that version, but the wisdom version of that. And as I started to kind of like theory craft some of these things, my brain just started breaking. And I think that we're going to reach a point where we don't understand the computers. I don't even know if we can call them computers anymore, where we create technology that we can't understand. And that's actually coming in like the next 5 years. If it isn't here already with the language models themselves, that they're going to be able to like go so deep in such sophisticated ways that they might have to create their own language to explain it to themselves or to other language models, that they might be running processes and computations that they design themselves that we can't fully understand why they work, but they work better than any other way of modeling or doing things that we've ever done. And that's sort of the real future that I see coming, is this moment where the human is not just they've passed us in a way in certain tasks, because like the model has an unfair advantage. It can access all of human knowledge like in an instant, right?
No big deal.
But we're still sort of in charge. We still have a sense of what's going on, and we can still like kind of we're the ones who tell the language model what to do. But there's going to be a point when it would really be better if they told us what to do, and we were just kind of like the quality check on the decision, because we can't understand the logic and intuition and everything behind that decision. And I think it's going to come sooner than we think, where you're going to have to trust the gut instinct of a computer or yourself, like where people are going to have to like make this this decision. And like I can't understand why this is true, but I think it's going to be true, and so I'm going with the AI on this one.
Depending on where you apply that, like that has such a huge implication for how it can affect us as individuals and as society, right? Like, if you're talking about accounting and you're like, there's a million numbers here, I'm just going to trust the AI. That seems a little easier than to say, you've looked at my background and you've looked at my psychological profile, and now you're recommending that I quit this job and go do something else, and it feels scary. Like that's at a whole other level, right?
Yeah. What if an AI looked at all the emails in an organization, a massive organization, determined the types of connections that people have with each other, the types of relationships, the power dynamics, like other things like that, and then gave advice on how to restructure or reorganize, or what roles were redundant. Like, there are some pretty insane things that could be done with just the regular data that's out there right now. Right. If you asked an AI to come up with a plan for it, and you might not like the answer.
Right.
But it might be true, like not just subjectively true, because like an AI can be made to be indifferent about the outcome and just kind of try to reach the best conclusion. But like there's also these AIs that they have access to some of the magic that previously only humans did. So for example, like I'm a marketer, and when we do conversion rate optimization for a landing page, sometimes weird counterintuitive things work. So like if you follow all the rules, so to speak, of marketing, there's a certain way to optimize a landing page. But sometimes when you make the thing uglier, it actually performs better because it like attracts attention, and it's hard to explain like what form of ugly is the most performant, and what kind of brand damage you're doing. And these things aren't like logical, but maybe there's a logic to it, but they sort of work based on magic and pseudoscience and intuition. Well, the AIs now have intuition, and so it's not just calculating a best practice. It's like they can start to come up with ideas like that for all sorts of things that are counterintuitive, but based on the sort of learned experience of the AI, like maybe it's going to work and we should give it a shot. And I think all of society is going to be disrupted by some of these innovations that come out of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I have more kids than most, and I just wonder, like, I didn't grow up in a reality where this was something I faced as a young person. And so I'm very curious to see how this affects people who are in the job market, 15, 20 years down the line, and what that looks like.
Yeah. I grew up in a world where your phone was at your house and it was attached to a wall and had a cord.
I was there. Yeah.
And when it rang, you picked it up and you didn't know who it was. And in that world, and we now live in a world where you don't have to be home to receive a call. Right. And we live in a world where not only that, but you have the internet and all of those things. And so, it seems so normal now, but when I do think back to, like my childhood and like the time I had to walk like a half a mile because like no one was answering the phone, but I wanted to like hang out with my friend and I knew he was home and like I had to go on the on the hunch that he must be there, but like something loud is going, like those things don't exist anymore. Right. Whatever it is, there's a version of that that's not going to exist anymore because of AI. And some people have some ideas about it. The thing about AI that I've been fascinated by is it's not actually, or a lot of the predictions haven't worked out the way people thought. So I remember there was a time when people were predicting that the creative skill sets would be the last to be affected by AI, because it's like, how can you make a robot into an artist? That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And now we see that with tools like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, imaging and the creation of interesting art was like one of the first things for AI to get really good at, probably even more than language to an extent. I feel like some of the first most fascinating things that AI has ever did for me was create images that like in an instant that I couldn't even have imagined. Right. So think of all the predictions that we have that are like that, where we're like, no way, that's not going to happen. Like everyone said that AI was coming for like truck drivers and stuff. Like we still don't have AI truck drivers. Right. But all these other professions like accountants are looking like they're going to be impacted because like that's the way the technology is headed.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating. It will be so fascinating to look back in 10 years, and we'll have probably posts on social media, if whatever that looks like at that point, but saying, here's the predictions, all the stuff like what the year 2000 was supposed to be like and how laughable that it actually wasn't flying cars and everything that we thought it was going to be in the 80s. We're
still, in my opinion, the only thing that we're never going to get is flying cars.
Right.
Because the laws of physics just make it really like not a good use of energy to like constantly fight against gravity in that way.
Well, yes. And on top of that, I'm out on the road and I see a lot of people who don't maintain their cars very well. And so they pull over to the side of the road because they break down. If you have a flying car that just breaks down and then it falls on my house and hits my kid, like that's a problem.
Yeah.
So that's always
also
been
that I hadn't considered that. I'm overdue for an oil change. If my car was a flying car, I would have done that by now.
That's right. Well, one of the things that I've just enjoyed watching you it's probably been like 12 months. I know that you sort of had a focus, at least on your Twitter account, for like audience building, and you were doing that for a long time. And like you said, you're a marketer, and then you sort of turned the corner towards really focusing and dialing in on AI. And I've sort of seen this progression of you being so excited to share what you're learning in terms of prompt craft. And I think you coined the term mega prompt.
Yes.
Are we? Yeah. So I used that in another podcast and I was excited because I'm helping disseminate your word. So you've grown a lot in this space. And I was just curious, like, where's your mind at right now when it comes to building prompts?
Well, if we go back in time, like 4 years ago, I actually started playing with AI in secret with GPT-2. And I was embarrassed because as a writer playing with AI writing tools, I didn't want anybody to think ever that like an AI wrote anything I put out, right? And so when all this happened, I was able to kind of go public with my secret enthusiasm. It was the greatest thing because I had basically like wasted hundreds of hours across years playing with a tool that I could like kind of never reveal. Like I never wanted to let anybody know that I knew so much about how it worked.
Right.
And so it was the best like waste of time I've ever done. And so a lot of that energy that you saw was like the outpouring of like, finally, I feel like the world's comfortable in hearing from me about these things, and like the feelings that were all pent up. In terms of where it's headed now, okay, so we talked before, like if a prompt is just a single thing that you ask a language model to do, and then it returns a response. That's kind of like where we're at right now. And for anyone who's listening who doesn't know what a mega prompt is, this is a strategy that I've kind of coined where we try and add more specificity, context, and information to the prompt to get a better result. So you can ask the prompt to act as a persona. You can give it steps to complete a task with. You can give it context around the task, or even an output that you want, or even examples of what you're talking about, or what kinds of outputs you want. And all these things make the prompt work better. That's just one step. It's like one command, one response. And like I was saying earlier, one of the things that I discovered while working on personality design with my co-host is that she responds more like herself when I ask the language model to basically do it in 2 steps, or maybe even 3. You might say 3. Like have your internal monologue about what you want to say, and then like say it out loud in the voice of Ruby, like as she would articulate it. And the results are like 5 times as good as if you try and have it do that all in one step. And so I do think that the direction that this is headed is not just for having really better single prompts, but looking at ways that we can iterate across a couple different passes of the mind of the AI, so to speak, to like, produce results that are even better, allowing it to kind of step-by-step reach conclusions, or help us in these chains or sequences of prompts, and figuring out what's the right amount of sequence and what's kind of a waste, because you do get a lot of extra writing when you go in a sequence. I think that's like kind of the next frontier that I'm really interested in cracking is I've got all these experiments planned or that I want to plan around taking some of my mega prompts, breaking them down into sequences, testing them against the original prompts, seeing like what's the right balance, what's the right mix of all these things. And lastly, what's interesting there is every language model and every new version of the language model behaves a little bit different to the same prompt. And so it's not like it's one universal skill. It's this constantly moving target. And so when GPT-4 version 2 comes out, and or when they fine tune it to do this, or when GPT-5 comes out, or Claude 2, or Sage 2, or Bing Chat 2, or like, every single one of these is going to have like a style that works the best, and that style is going to be different across different disciplines or types of queries. It might be to get a mathematical answer from this AI, do it like this, but on this other one, it's not good at math at all, but you can get a really amazing answer to a philosophical question if you use this approach. I think there's never been so much undiscovered territory in like knowledge before. And it's all just kind of waiting for us to experiment and try and figure out how to get in there.
Wow. So you're saying the multi-step process seems to be where you're getting the best results, at least at the moment. So do you see that following a pattern? Like if I start with X, then ask for Y, I end up with Z?
I don't know if it's so easy to articulate as that.
Okay.
So it started with, I read a paper about something called chain of thought prompting. And in chain of thought prompting, you basically teach in your prompt the AI how to think something through, and then you ask it to think something else through. So you say like the examples in these papers are often math questions where they're like, if Mary has 6 apples and she gives 3 to Johnny, and then Johnny eats 1 apple, how many apples does Mary have? Or they do one of those kinds of things. And then the prompt says, let's think this through. Like, Mary had 6 but gave 3 away, so now she has 3. And it'll show like the logic to follow.
Okay.
And then you might prompt after that, now figure out for me a more complicated question or a different kind of question. So that's where I got the idea, was like, how do we walk the AI through a chain of thought? Now, this is where it gets really interesting to me as someone who, like, let's take marketing, for example. If you have any specialized knowledge, you have all these implicit ways of thinking that like you don't know anymore, or like you don't know consciously anymore. So when I think about marketing, I think about who's my audience? What do they care about? What do they suffer? Like what challenges are preventing them from achieving their goals? I have a lot of thoughts like that. And then I think, well, how can I help solve those challenges? And what's the best method of communicating to this type of person? Are they busy? Are they on the go? Do they respond to visuals? Do they read? Do they like to be entertained? Like there's all these different things that go on in my mind that I don't consciously do anything with. And I just write a tweet or create some content intuitively. Well, I think we can take any kind of knowledge, like if you have any subject matter knowledge like that, where you can investigate into your own process of like, what are all the assumptions that I'm making, or what are like the little things that I've done a few times and that I don't have to do anymore to think about my own audience or customer or project, but that the AI has never done and doesn't know and has no context around. And what if I ask it to walk through some of those steps first to develop a very vivid picture of all the moving pieces of this, and then at the end ask it to actually do the thing I want it to do? The results are they're like orders of magnitude more useful when you do something like this.
So what's the difference between setting it up with a lot of context and information? So say you start off by saying, I'm a marketer, my target market is interested in da 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 da. You know, the concerns are these things. So how are you having the AI reason with you through that, rather than just saying, here's a bunch of stuff for you to set as your context?
Yeah, so if you take any of those as a step, you can ask it to explain or break down or provide context or expand on various ideas. So I might say my audience has these adjectives and suffers from these challenges. That's still relatively simplistic in terms of if you think of the complexity of the human experience. We're not just a few adjectives and like, a few labels. And so you could say, then break these challenges down. What happens? Why do they happen? What happens before that they occur? What happens while they occur? What happens after they occur? So we start to expand the boundaries of the context into the subtleties of a problem, or how does this happen? Who does it happen to? Who is impacted? Who has the money to purchase the solution? Like, once you start to kind of go down this path, you can come up with a lot of questions. And here's a technique that, even if you don't know what the questions to ask are, if you've previously asked some different kind of follow-up questions or something, you can ask the AI, how should we expand this topic or this idea in a way that'll give you more context? Like, you tell me what we should do. Like, so like you just need one good example, and it can infer all the new pieces of information it needs on a totally different topic.
Dude, this has been incredible. I've been trying to learn as much as I can about these AI technologies, using ChatGPT, following your stuff. And here we are in just a short, 40-minute conversation. I've already feel like I've learned so much. So thank you for doing this with me.
Oh yeah.
One of the things I like to do at the end of the show is just ask you for 3 actionable things that our audience could kind of take away and run with. So I'm curious what your 3 might be.
Yeah. So we might start with taking action on some of the prompt craft advice that I was giving earlier. So the next time that you find yourself talking to a chatbot or something like that, instead of just asking the basic question, maybe try and apply one of these other strategies. Can you give it more context? Can you ask it to act as an expert? Or can you actually unpack the question that you are about to ask first and then ask the question second? So just experience the difference even. You could take that a step further and like see what happened if you just ask the question and then start a new chat and ask it in a different way, and realize that this this is an emerging skill that will carry you for decades potentially, if you can start to learn how to ask these questions now. So that's one. The next one is, I think that a lot of people are afraid right now that AI is coming for their jobs. And like we have this excitement around it, but a lot of people are not excited. They're very worried. And I want to encourage people, if you see an area where AI is going to be able to do something that you previously could do, to think about how can you increase the value for your customer or the value for your firm that you create, given that you don't have to do that menial task or that uncreative action or that simple thing that you used to have to do. And I want you to flip the script on this narrative. I don't think AI is coming for jobs. Like, humans need jobs. It's sort of like part of how we work, but we also need to create value. So if you are unburdened by some piece of work, how can you create new value in your organization and take whatever skill you have and apply it, somewhere else? Mm-hmm. I think that'll be really important moving forward. So one of the reasons that I took the leap into AI as a influencer, so to speak, was that I was worried about the sort of bad guys winning in this, like people coming in and just churning out AI written books with no soul and no heart and uninteresting content and flooding the market and making it really hard to find the good books, or all the different things that can be done in excess. And so if you are a so-called good guy, if you want to create amazing content, if you want to use AI to create things of interest, I want to be encouraging to that. And if you are thinking about trying to get a quick buck, I can make 1 million web pages with all of this machine written content, I want to encourage you to rethink what's going to happen when you do that and when everybody does that, and whether that's the world that we all want to live in. I think that we have an opportunity to make really cool stuff right now, but we also have an opportunity to kind of ruin a lot of nice things. And I hope that we do the first one more than the second one.
Well, if we learn anything from our history, we'll probably end up doing a little bit of both. So, yeah. Well, okay. When is the podcast coming out?
First week of April. So
first week of April.
It may even be out by the time this episode.
It very well might be. Yes. That's great. Well, I hope everybody has an opportunity to check it out. And then you also have an AI content reactor. That's the name of it, right? You got it right?
Content reactor. Yeah. If you go to mindmeetsmachine.ai, you'll find links to my courses, my guides, my podcast. I'm adding a lot to that website every week. It's kind of going to be the hub of all the interesting things that I'm doing around AI. Other than what you find if you follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn, you get a taste of a lot of that as well.
Hey, thanks so much for being a part of the show. Let's continue this conversation. Feel free to connect with me on Twitter, where I'm at Craig Shoemaker. So go out and have an amazing day. I hope you get a chance to find someone to love, find someone to forgive, and find someone to encourage, because we are most certainly not in this alone. And I'll see you again here soon on the Leverage 3 podcast.